The morning sun burned hot over the endless desert. It was day 12 of filming, and the entire crew looked tired. The movie set stood between long stretches of sand and rock. The air shimmered with heat, and even the wind seemed dry and heavy. Still, Sandra Bullock smiled at the young crew, telling them softly, "Let's give it one more take." Her voice carried strength, but her eyes looked faint behind her sunglasses. The scene was meant to be a turning point in the film, an emotional moment of survival and courage. Sandra had to walk through the sandstorm set, fall to her knees, and look up at the burning sky. Keanu Reeves, standing just off camera, watched closely. He had seen her push through exhaustion before, but something felt different today. Her steps were slower, her breathing too deep. The director shouted, "Action!" and the fans roared to life, throwing sand and dust through the air. Sandra walked into the wind, eyes half closed, face pale under makeup. She knelt as the script demanded, but then she didn't rise. The cameras kept rolling, thinking it was part of her act. For a long second, no one moved. Then Keanu dropped his water bottle and ran. Crew members froze as Sandra collapsed forward, motionless in the sand. Keanu reached her first, kneeling beside her, brushing dust from her face. "Sandra, can you hear me?" he asked softly, his voice calm but firm. Her pulse was weak, her skin hot. He looked up and shouted, "Call the medic now!" The set turned into chaos. Assistants ran in every direction, radios crackled with panic, and the director kept asking what happened. But Keanu didn't leave her side. He gently lifted her head, shielding her from the harsh sun with his hand. When the medic arrived, Keanu helped them carry her to the shade behind a large prop truck. Minutes later, the production halted completely. Sandra was moved to her trailer, unconscious but breathing. Everyone waited outside, whispering and worried. Rumors started. Some said it was dehydration. Others said it was stress. One crew member even cried quietly, afraid something worse had happened. Inside the trailer, Keanu sat beside Sandra, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. His calm voice broke the silence. "You're okay, just rest now." She didn't respond, but her breathing eased slightly. Keanu stayed still, barely blinking, watching her as if time itself had slowed down. When the doctor finally arrived, he looked surprised to see Keanu still there. "You can go rest, sir. We'll take care of her," the doctor said politely. Keanu shook his head. "I'll stay." It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple and final. As the doctor examined Sandra, he noticed something unusual. "She's been unwell for days," he murmured. "This isn't just heat exhaustion. Her blood pressure is low, her sugar levels too." He turned to Keanu and asked, "Did she tell anyone she wasn't feeling well?" Keanu's jaw tightened. He remembered her quiet smile that morning, the way she said she was fine when he offered her water. When the doctor left to fetch medicine, Keanu opened the small bag Sandra kept beside her chair. Inside were notes, scripts, and a bottle of herbal supplements. Beneath them, he found something folded, a handwritten note that said, "Keep going, everyone believes in you." He looked at it for a long moment, his eyes heavy with emotion. Outside, reporters had already started calling the studio, sensing drama. The assistant director tried to keep things quiet, but the crew whispered about what happened. One of them said, "Keanu hasn't left her side since she fell." Another added, "He's refusing to film until she's okay." Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower. Sandra finally opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was Keanu sitting near her bed, holding a small portable fan toward her. He smiled gently. "Hey, you scared everyone today." She tried to sit up, but he stopped her softly. "Don't move yet. You need rest." Her voice was weak. "How long was I out?" "A few hours," he said. "The doctor says you were pushing too hard." She closed her eyes again, whispering, "We can't delay the shoot." Keanu leaned forward, speaking quietly but firmly. "The film can wait." "You can't." There was silence. Sandra looked at him, her expression somewhere between gratitude and guilt. "I didn't want anyone to think I was weak," she said softly. Keanu shook his head. "Taking care of yourself isn't weakness. It's strength." His words carried a calm truth that filled the small space. Outside, the wind had slowed, and the desert light turned gold. He stood up slowly, adjusted her blanket, and left her to rest. But instead of returning to his hotel, he walked to the production van and spoke with the manager. "We need to bring a full medical team tomorrow," he said. "And schedule shorter shooting hours." The manager frowned. "That's not in the budget." Keanu looked at him steadily. "Then take it from my pay." The manager stared, unsure how to reply. Keanu turned and walked away before he could answer. That night, while everyone ate dinner at the camp, Keanu stayed near Sandra's trailer, reading quietly under a small lantern. He didn't make any announcement or speech. He didn't tell anyone what he did. But somehow, word spread among the crew that he had arranged for more safety measures. Before sleeping, Sandra woke again. She looked around and saw a note taped near her water bottle. It read, "Kindness is stronger than medicine." There was no name, but she knew who left it. Her eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the quiet power of his care. As she lay there, the moonlight glowed softly through the thin curtains. She whispered to herself, "Thank you." Outside, Keanu looked up at the same sky, unaware she was awake. For him, helping wasn't about being seen. It was about doing what was right. The desert was silent, but something had changed forever. The next morning, no one spoke about the fall as gossip anymore. Instead, they spoke about respect, patience, and how one act of kindness could bring a whole team closer together. And deep down, Sandra knew that what happened that day wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was the beginning of something far stronger. The next morning, the air was cooler and the sky looked soft and pale. Sandra woke to the sound of quiet footsteps outside her trailer. She sat up slowly, feeling weak but better than the night before. On the small table near her bed was a cup of tea, still warm, with a short note beside it. It said, "Drink this before the sun gets strong." No name again, but she smiled. She walked to the door and peeked out. Keanu was standing near a truck talking to a group of young crew members. His clothes were simple, dusty from the sand, but his voice carried calm authority. He was helping them fix a broken shade tent. When one of them thanked him, he just nodded and said, "We're all in this together." Sandra stepped outside carefully, the morning air brushing her face. A few crew members noticed her and rushed over, offering water and chairs. She thanked them kindly and looked toward Keanu. He noticed her, gave a small smile, and walked over. "You should still be resting," he said softly. "The doctor said I could walk a little," she replied, her tone light but tired. "A little doesn't mean under the sun," he said, half smiling. She laughed quietly. "You sound like my brother." He replied gently, "Someone has to." For a moment, they stood in silence. The wind carried the sound of the crew setting up the next scene. Sandra looked at the horizon and said, "Thank you for what you did yesterday. I don't remember everything, but I know you were there." Keanu looked down and said, "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she whispered. "Not everyone stays when cameras stop rolling." Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a bottle of water. "You should sit in the shade. I'll make sure your trailer stays cool." He turned and walked away before she could say more. But Sandra noticed something. The way people looked at him had changed. The crew who once kept their distance now watched him with quiet admiration. They whispered about how he had carried her through the sand, how he had stayed until midnight to ensure she was safe. But Keanu acted as if nothing happened. He never spoke about it, never took credit. By noon, the director decided to delay filming for a few more hours. "We'll start after sunset," he said. "It's safer for everyone." No one complained. Instead, they gathered in small groups, fixing props, setting lights, and preparing carefully. Sandra sat under a large canopy with her script, trying to focus. But her mind kept returning to the strange note she had found the night before. Kindness is stronger than medicine. She wondered how long Keanu had been watching over her, how much he had noticed that she herself had ignored. A soft knock broke her thoughts. It was one of the assistants holding a small package. "This was delivered from the main office," he said. She opened it and found a small silver charm shaped like a star. There was no sender's name, only a tag that said, "For light in hard times." She held it in her hand, puzzled and touched. "Was it from the studio? A fan? Or someone else?" Her heart told her the answer. As the day went on, the mood on set grew peaceful. Everyone seemed slower, kinder, more patient. Keanu walked around quietly, helping anyone who looked tired. When the camera operator dropped his tool, Keanu picked it up with a smile. When the costume designer spilled fabric on the sand, Keanu helped her gather it before the wind carried it away. He never made speeches, never gave orders. He just acted with simple kindness that others couldn't ignore. By sunset, Sandra felt stronger. She decided to join the set again for a few light rehearsals. The desert sky glowed orange and purple as the crew set the lights. The director said gently, "Take it easy tonight. No long takes." She nodded, but inside she was nervous. Her mind replayed the fall again and again. What if she wasn't ready? When she stepped onto the sand, Keanu was already there, standing quietly beside the camera. He gave her a reassuring nod. "You're ready," he said softly. She smiled weakly. "You really think so?" "I know so," he replied. The scene began. Sandra walked slowly through the dim desert light, following her mark. The wind machines started, sending soft waves of sand around her. She spoke her lines calmly, her voice steady. Halfway through, the lights flickered and one of the fans broke down with a loud spark. Everyone panicked for a moment, but Keanu moved fast, cutting the power and shielding Sandra again, even before anyone else reacted. The set went silent. The director shouted, "Cut!" Technicians rushed in, checking the equipment. Sandra stood still, her heart pounding. Keanu looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded, breathing heavily. "I think so. Just startled." He gave a small smile. "You handled it better than the machines did." The tension faded, and laughter spread through the crew. They fixed the equipment and ended early for safety. As everyone packed up, the director approached Sandra quietly. "You've got someone watching out for you," he said with a grin. "Not everyone gets a guardian like him." That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She sat outside her trailer under the stars, thinking about everything that had happened. The desert was quiet, and far away she saw Keanu helping a technician fix a broken lamp. His face glowed faintly in the light, calm and steady as always. She whispered to herself, "He's not just kind, he's aware." She remembered how he had noticed her tiredness long before she fell. It wasn't luck that he was there, it was care. Suddenly, the sound of a soft cough came from behind her. She turned and saw one of the youngest crew members, a girl named Maya, holding her hand to her chest. "Miss Sandra," she said nervously, "I wanted to thank you. When you fainted yesterday, Mr. Reeves told everyone to stay calm and to treat each other gently. He said panic spreads faster than pain." Sandra looked at the girl, surprised. "He said that?" Maya nodded. "Yes. After that, no one shouted, no one blamed anyone. It felt peaceful, even though everyone was scared." Sandra smiled softly, looking toward Keanu again. "Maybe that's the kind of peace the world needs more of," she said. Maya asked quietly, "Do you think he'll ever talk about what he did?" Sandra shook her head. "No, and that's why it means so much." The next morning, a new rumor spread that the studio might send a journalist to cover the incident. Some said it was for publicity, others said it was to show gratitude. But when Keanu heard about it, he asked the director to cancel it. "Let her rest," he said. "Don't turn her weakness into headlines," the director agreed reluctantly. Sandra found out later and felt tears rise again. She realized that Keanu was protecting not just her health, but her dignity. By the end of the week, something remarkable had changed on set. People started helping each other more. The food team shared cold water with the camera crew. Drivers offered rides for anyone walking under the heat. No one ordered them to do it. They just followed the quiet example of one man. And as Sandra watched the new spirit grow around her, she knew something special was happening. This wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a lesson in humanity hidden inside a film production. As the sun set behind the dunes again, Sandra looked at the charm she kept in her pocket, the small silver star. She whispered, "Light in hard times," and smiled. She didn't know yet that the real reason behind Keanu's care was deeper than anyone could imagine. Something from his past, something that connected pain and kindness in a way no one on that set could yet understand. The days that followed felt peaceful on the surface, But Sandra sensed something hidden beneath Keanu's calm face. He was kind to everyone, but there was a quiet sadness in his eyes. He smiled often, yet it never reached too far. The crew only saw his strength, but Sandra began to see the weight he carried behind it. One evening, after another long day of shooting, the director called for a break. The lights dimmed and people gathered around the food truck for dinner. Sandra looked around and realized Keanu was missing. She asked one of the crew members, "Where's Keanu?" "He went to the old trailer near the ridge," someone said. "He said he wanted to check the lights." Curious, Sandra walked through the dim desert path toward the ridge. The sky glowed with pink and blue as the sun sank. She found the trailer half-lit, surrounded by silence. Inside, Keanu was fixing an old lamp, its weak bulb flickering. She stood quietly at the door and watched him work. His hands gentle, his movements slow and patient. After a moment, she said softly, "You could ask the crew to do that." "You know," Keanu looked up, surprised but smiling. "They've done enough today. This light still works. It just needed care." She stepped closer, her eyes following the flicker. "You remind me of that lamp." He raised an eyebrow. "A lamp?" She nodded. "You keep giving light even when you're almost out of energy." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I just like fixing things that people stop noticing." Sandra smiled. "You mean people like me?" He paused for a second, then said quietly, "No, people like me too." For a moment, the air was still. The wind outside whistled softly through the desert dunes. Sandra looked at him and saw something change in his eyes, a shadow of memory. She asked gently, "Why do you always care so much for others but never for yourself?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down on a chair, looking at the small flame of the lamp. "Years ago, on another set, someone collapsed just like you did," he said slowly. "We were filming in a mountain village. She was a stunt woman. She worked harder than anyone, never complained. One day, she just fell. No one noticed until it was too late." Sandra listened, her heart tightening. "What happened?" Keanu looked at his hands. "She didn't make it. She had a condition no one knew about. I was right there, but I didn't see the signs. I still think about that day. I promised myself I'd never let it happen again to anyone if I could help it." The silence between them grew deep. Sandra whispered, "So that's why you were watching me so closely." He nodded slowly. "You reminded me of her. The same strength, the same silence. You keep giving until your body says no." She blinked back tears. "You were carrying guilt all this time." Keanu shook his head softly. "Not guilt, just a lesson. Sometimes caring is the only way to heal what you couldn't fix before." Sandra didn't know what to say. She walked closer and sat beside him. The lamp flickered between them, its faint orange light painting both their faces in warmth. "That woman you lost," she said gently. "She'd be proud of how you turned pain into kindness." Keanu looked at her quietly, his eyes reflecting the lamp's glow. "Maybe," he said softly. "Or maybe she'd tell me to finally rest." Outside, the night had grown darker. The sound of laughter from the crew faded as the desert wind rose. Sandra felt something heavy in her heart. Keanu's kindness wasn't just goodness, it was healing. Every gentle act he gave to others was a way to repair something inside himself. The next day, Sandra woke early and decided to do something different. Before sunrise, she visited the crew tents and helped set up breakfast. When the crew arrived, they were surprised to see her handing out coffee with a bright smile. She said softly, "Good morning. No work today until everyone eats." Keanu arrived a few minutes later, blinking in surprise. "You're becoming a rebel," he said jokingly. She smiled. "You started it." During the shoot, the energy felt lighter. Laughter returned and mistakes didn't frustrate anyone. People seemed calmer, kinder, more connected. Keanu noticed the change but didn't realize that Sandra was now following his lead, not just as a co-star, but as a friend trying to reflect his light back to him. By sunset, the scene of the day required both of them. It was a quiet, emotional moment where their characters shared grief and hope under a dying sky. The director called action, and something magical happened. They didn't act. They simply felt. Every word they spoke on camera carried a truth they couldn't hide. After the scene ended, the entire crew stood in silence before clapping. One cameraman whispered, "That wasn't acting. That was real." That night, as they packed up, the studio manager arrived with bad news. A powerful storm was moving toward the desert, and they might have to shut down production for days. Everyone groaned, worried about delays. But Keanu looked at the sky and said, "Storms pass. Sometimes they just come to remind us what calm feels like afterward." As lightning flashed far in the distance, Sandra watched him again. His calmness wasn't ordinary. It was strength born from struggle. She wondered how many storms he had faced alone before learning to guide others through theirs. Later that night, the wind grew wild. Sand whipped against the trailers. Power flickered and died. The crew gathered inside the main tent holding flashlights. Sandra looked around. Keanu wasn't there. "Where's Keanu?" she asked urgently. Someone said, "He went out to secure the lights before the storm hit." Her heart jumped. She grabbed a raincoat and ran outside into the wind. The sky flashed white with thunder. She saw him in the distance, holding down a fallen light stand, struggling against the gusts. She shouted his name, but the wind drowned her voice. She ran through the sand, fighting the storm until she reached him. "You could get hurt!" she yelled. He smiled faintly through the rain. "It's just a storm, Sandra." "You don't have to fix everything," she cried. He looked at her, eyes calm, even in chaos. "Maybe not everything, just what's in front of me." Together they pulled the cables to safety. The storm roared louder, but neither backed down. When the last light was secured, they ran to a shelter and collapsed inside, breathing hard, soaked but safe. For a moment, they just laughed in disbelief. Sandra looked at him, her heart full. "You're impossible," she said. He smiled, brushing sand from his hair. "So are you." The storm howled outside, but inside the small shelter, it felt quiet. She looked at him and said softly, "You never talk much about yourself, do you?" He shrugged lightly. "Some stories are meant to be lived, not told." She smiled. "Maybe. But this one deserves to be shared." Keanu looked at her thoughtfully, and for the first time his smile faded into something raw and real. "If you share it, make sure it's not about me," he said quietly. "Make it about the kindness that keeps the world standing even in storms like this." The thunder echoed again, but Sandra didn't feel afraid. She understood him now. Not just the man who helped her when she fell, but the man who carried invisible scars and still chose to be gentle. And as the storm began to calm outside, Sandra realized that she hadn't just met a co-star. She had met a living example of what humanity could be: strong, humble, and endlessly kind. The morning after the storm felt unreal. The desert, usually dry and harsh, was now covered in a thin layer of silver mist. Broken equipment and scattered props lay half-buried in the sand, and the tents leaned tiredly from the night's wind. Yet, there was peace in the air, like nature itself had taken a deep breath after crying all night. Sandra woke early, her body sore, but her heart strangely light. The memory of last night, the thunder, the rush, Keanu's calm voice in the chaos, played in her mind like a quiet song. She stepped outside her trailer and found Keanu already awake, repairing one of the damaged spotlights. His hands moved with slow precision, and though his shirt was still damp from the storm, he looked completely focused. She walked closer. "You didn't sleep?" He smiled faintly without looking up. "Sleep can wait. These lights can't." She crossed her arms. "You do realize you can't save the entire desert, right?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe not, but I can fix one broken thing at a time." For a moment, they both stood there, watching the sunrise stretch across the dunes. Sandra said quietly, "You were right about storms. They do remind us what calm feels like afterward." He nodded. "And calm reminds us who stayed beside us during the storm." Their eyes met for a moment, both understanding more than they could say. But before she could reply, the director's voice echoed from the distance, calling everyone to a quick meeting. The crew gathered around the main tent. Most of them looked tired, but there was warmth in their faces. The director began, "The storm caused damage to our set, but we're lucky no one was hurt. We'll rebuild and continue in 2 days." Then he paused, looking toward Keanu and Sandra. "But before that, there's something we all want to say." The costume designer stepped forward, holding a small handmade card. "We wanted to thank both of you," she said. When the storm hit, some of us panicked. But you stayed calm and you helped everyone. That meant a lot. The crew clapped softly. Sandra looked surprised, but Keanu shook his head quickly. You don't need to thank me, he said. Everyone helped each other. That's what matters. But the director smiled. Keanu, humility is your middle name. Still, let us say it. Laughter broke through the tension, and for the first time since the storm, everyone smiled freely. Later that day, as the sun rose higher, Sandra helped a few crew members collect scattered props from the dunes. She noticed that every time someone dropped something, Keanu was already there to pick it up. He moved through the set like quiet wind, unseen but always felt. In the afternoon, the studio sent a message announcing that media coverage would focus on the film's resilience after the storm. Reporters were on their way to interview the stars. Sandra frowned as she read the message. They're coming to make it about headlines, she said softly. Keanu looked at her calmly. Then we make it about gratitude. When the reporters arrived, they began with dramatic questions. How did you survive the storm? Were you scared for your life? What was the moment you realized it might all end? But Sandra interrupted with a gentle smile. We didn't survive alone, she said. We survived because of kindness. Because when things fell apart, people looked after each other instead of running. The reporters turned to Keanu next. Mr. Reeves, is it true that you risked your safety to save the equipment? One of them asked eagerly. He gave a small smile. No one saves equipment, he said softly. We save each other. Everything else can be rebuilt. His answer silenced them for a moment. One reporter whispered to another, That's the quote of the day. After the interviews, Sandra walked beside Keanu, shaking her head in quiet admiration. You always know how to turn noise into peace, she said. He smiled. Maybe peace is just what's left when ego fades. The next few days passed quickly. The crew rebuilt the set with renewed energy. Laughter returned. Music played from the sound truck, and even the desert seemed brighter. Sandra worked again with full strength, but something had changed inside her. She didn't just act anymore, she felt. Every scene, every line, every glance carried the memory of what they had endured together. One evening, during a short break, Sandra found herself alone on the set. The sky was painted in gold, and the wind carried a calm hum. She walked toward the same lamp Keanu had repaired earlier. It glowed faintly against the fading sunlight. She sat beside it, holding her silver charm, the little star that had arrived mysteriously days ago. As she traced its edges, she whispered, Light in hard times. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Keanu approached, holding 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and sat down beside her quietly. For a few minutes, they said nothing, just watching the last rays of the sun melt into the horizon. Finally, Sandra spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, about that stunt woman. Keanu looked at her, his face gentle but serious. She continued softly, You said you couldn't save her, but I think you've been saving people ever since. Maybe not from danger, but from forgetting that kindness exists. He looked down at his cup, thoughtful. You give me too much credit. No, she said, shaking her head. I think you give yourself too little. A moment passed, filled with quiet respect. Keanu smiled faintly, then said, Do you know why I keep fixing lamps? She tilted her head. Why? Because once someone told me that the smallest light still makes darkness lose its way. I didn't believe it then, but now after all this I do. She looked at him, her eyes soft. Maybe you're that smallest light for all of us. He laughed quietly. Then I'm glad you noticed it before the batteries ran out. They both laughed softly, the sound mixing with the evening wind. As night fell, the set lights came alive again. The crew prepared for one of the final scenes. Sandra and Keanu stood before the cameras, ready for a powerful moment in the film. One where 2 characters, broken by loss, find hope in helping each other. As the director called action, the camera rolled. But something strange happened. Keanu wasn't just acting. His eyes carried every emotion he had hidden: grief, love, strength, and quiet care. Sandra felt tears rise as she matched his emotion. It didn't feel like a performance anymore. It felt like truth. When the scene ended, the crew stood in complete silence. Then, without anyone saying a word, they began to clap. Not the usual applause for a good take. but slow, emotional clapping that came from the heart. Sandra turned to Keanu and said softly, "You gave them something real." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "They just saw what kindness looks like when it stops pretending." Later that night, as the crew celebrated their progress, Sandra found another note on her trailer mirror. It was written in neat handwriting. "Thank you for reminding me that healing is shared." Again, no name, but she didn't need one. The next morning, she decided to do something in return. She gathered the crew secretly before filming began. When Keanu arrived, he found everyone standing in a circle, each holding a small lantern. Sandra stepped forward and said, "These lights represent what you taught us, that even in storms, kindness keeps us standing." Keanu looked around, speechless. He tried to smile, but his eyes shimmered with emotion. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Sandra replied softly, "Neither did you. That's what makes it powerful." As the sun rose behind them, dozens of small lanterns glowed in the morning light. It was a sight no camera could truly capture, the beauty of shared respect and silent gratitude. And as they stood together in that soft glow, Sandra realized that something far greater than a movie had been created in that desert. It was a memory, a lesson, a truth, one that would live far beyond the screen. 2 weeks passed, and the film neared completion. The energy on set was no longer just about cameras or scripts. People smiled more, argued less, and worked with calm respect. Something invisible had changed in the air, something born from quiet acts of care. The storm, the recovery, the night of glowing lanterns, every moment had left its mark. The studio executives arrived that week, expecting to find a tired team and delayed schedules. Instead, they found unity, laughter, and a bond stronger than deadlines. As Sandra and Keanu prepared for their final scene together, a production assistant rushed toward them with her phone in hand. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. She showed a trending social media post, a leaked photo of the lantern ceremony. It had spread everywhere overnight. The image showed Keanu standing silently among glowing lights, surrounded by crew members with grateful faces. The caption read, "On this set, kindness became the director." The post had millions of views and comments flooded in. People from around the world wrote messages like, "The world needs more of this energy," and "Keanu never changes, still the most humble man in Hollywood." Sandra smiled softly, but Keanu looked uneasy. "They weren't supposed to post that," he said quietly. She touched his arm gently. "Maybe it's not about fame this time. Maybe people just needed to remember that goodness still exists." For the first time, Keanu didn't protest. He just looked at the screen, reading one comment that said, "If kindness could be filmed, this would be the movie." The next morning, journalists arrived at the desert camp asking for interviews. The studio encouraged it, saying it would help the film's message. Sandra agreed, but only under one condition, that the story stay true to the spirit of what happened. During the interview, a reporter asked Sandra, what inspired such unity on set? Was it the script, the team, or something else? Sandra smiled thoughtfully. "It wasn't the story in the script," she said softly. "It was the story behind the scenes. It was a reminder that we can't fake kindness. It either lives in us or it doesn't." Another reporter asked, "Do you mean Keanu's actions?" Sandra hesitated, then smiled gently. "I mean everyone's, but yes, someone started it. Someone who believes helping quietly is better than being praised loudly." Keanu, who had been standing nearby, gave a polite smile but stayed silent. When the interview ended, he disappeared again, as he often did when attention grew too heavy. That evening, Sandra found him sitting behind the trailers, repairing one of the broken fans they used during the storm scenes. She sat beside him quietly. After a moment, she said, "You never stop fixing things, do you?" He smiled. "Broken things remind me that care still matters." She watched him for a moment, then said softly, "I know you didn't want the photo to spread, but it's touching lives. I've been reading the comments. People are saying your silence gave them hope." He paused his work, looking at her seriously. "Hope shouldn't depend on me. It should come from everyone remembering they can care." Then maybe that's what you did, she replied gently. You reminded them. Later that night, the director gathered the cast and crew for a small dinner to celebrate the end of filming. Under the soft glow of string lights, everyone laughed and shared stories. Then the director raised a glass and said, "This film was supposed to tell a story about courage. But what happened here taught us something deeper. Courage is kindness that doesn't need an audience." Everyone clapped, and Keanu tried to blend into the background, but Sandra gestured for him to step forward. "Come on," she said with a warm smile. "This moment belongs to you too." Reluctantly, he joined the group. The crew began chanting his name jokingly, and for a rare moment he laughed, a full, open laugh that surprised even himself. The sound of that laughter felt like sunlight breaking through after rain. As the night grew quiet, Sandra walked a short distance from the camp to look at the stars. She felt a presence beside her. It was Keanu again, holding a folded paper. He handed it to her silently. She opened it and read, "This is for you. Not for the world. Thank you for reminding me that kindness is shared, not owned." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to thank me." "I did," he said simply. "Because when I first saw you fall, I only thought about saving you. But now I realize you helped save me too." She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, his voice steady but low. "After losing that stunt woman years ago, I stopped believing I could make a difference. I helped people, but it was from guilt, not hope. Then you showed me that kindness can heal both ways. It heals the one who gives and the one who receives." Sandra felt tears sting her eyes. Maybe that's the real story here. Not just healing from pain, but learning that caring never ends. It just keeps passing forward. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars above. The desert wind moved gently through the night. As they returned to the camp, one of the crew members played soft music from a speaker. Everyone gathered again, laughing and swaying to the rhythm. Keanu and Sandra sat side by side, sharing quiet smiles while the others danced around them. The next day, the film wrapped. Everyone hugged and promised to meet again someday. Before leaving, Sandra visited Keanu's trailer. It was nearly empty, except for one small lamp sitting on the table, the same one he had fixed weeks ago. A faint note rested beside it. "Leave this lamp where stories end. Someone might need the light next." She smiled and left it there, lighting it one last time before stepping out. Months later, when the film was released, the behind-the-scenes photo of the lanterns reappeared online. People from all over the world shared it with the same caption, "Real heroes shine quietly." And though Keanu never commented publicly, Sandra knew that somewhere he was smiling, not because of fame, but because the world had finally understood the message he lived by every day. Months passed since the movie finished. The desert was long behind them, but the lessons it gave remained alive. The film had become a global success, not only because of its story, but because people could feel the truth behind the scenes. Viewers said they cried not from the script, but from the soul that lived inside every frame. Sandra and Keanu were invited to countless interviews and award shows. Every journalist wanted to ask about that one question, what really happened in the desert. But Keanu stayed silent, always saying the same words. It was teamwork. Yet everyone who looked into his calm eyes could sense something deeper. One evening, months after the premiere, Sandra was invited to speak at a charity event for young filmmakers. She wore a simple black dress and carried the same silver star charm in her hand. The auditorium was full of students eager to hear about success, fame, and stardom. But when she began speaking, her tone was soft and humble. "You might think stories are made of scripts," she said, "but sometimes the real story hides behind the camera. I learned that on a film set where one man's quiet kindness changed everything." The audience leaned forward, listening closely. Sandra continued, "It wasn't about heroism. It was about noticing. Noticing when someone is tired, when someone needs help, when silence speaks louder than words. That's what real art is. Not pretending to be good on screen, but being good when no one is watching." As she spoke, Keanu entered the hall quietly from the back. He hadn't told her he would come. He simply stood there, listening, a small smile forming on his face as the crowd clapped. After her speech, Sandra walked off stage and saw him waiting by the door. She smiled. "I didn't expect you." He replied softly, "I didn't want to steal your moment." "It wasn't my moment," she said. "It was ours." They walked together outside into the cool evening air. The event organizers had set up lanterns along the path. The lights flickered gently in the breeze, reminding them both of that night in the desert. Sandra looked at him and said, "You know, people still talk about that photo. They call you the symbol of silent kindness." He smiled humbly. "Symbols fade. Actions stay," she nodded. "And you keep acting in the best way possible." They reached the parking lot where a small group of students waited shyly for autographs. Keanu greeted each one kindly, listening to their stories, giving advice without rushing. One young man held out a crumpled piece of paper and said nervously, "Sir, I just wanted to thank you. After watching your story, I started volunteering at a shelter. My mother said I smile more now." Keanu smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Keep doing that. Every small act counts." As the student walked away, Sandra whispered, "See, this is what I mean. Kindness doesn't fade, it multiplies." Weeks later, the studio announced that part of the film's profit would fund a new program for young artists from struggling backgrounds. The program was named the Light Project. The idea had come from Sandra, but she insisted the name be chosen by Keanu. He smiled and said simply, "Call it Light, because we all need one when life goes dark." During the first ceremony of the program, both were invited again. The hall was full of students, teachers, and volunteers. On stage stood the same lamp Keanu had repaired in the desert, placed carefully at the center. The host said, "This lamp represents how one quiet action can light hundreds of others." The audience clapped, and Keanu looked down, trying to hide his emotion. Sandra leaned toward him and whispered, "You didn't fix a lamp that day. You fixed people." He smiled quietly and whispered back, "Maybe they fixed me too." As the ceremony ended, Sandra asked one of the organizers where they had found the old lamp. The woman smiled. "It was returned to us by a driver who worked on your set. He said he found it glowing on a table one night with a note attached." Sandra's heart skipped. "A note?" she asked. The woman nodded and handed it to her. The paper was worn and faded, but the words were clear. "Leave this lamp where kindness is needed next." Sandra folded the note gently and smiled, tears forming in her eyes. She looked at Keanu and said softly, "It found its way home." He nodded, his eyes glistening. Kindness always does. Months later, when the award season arrived, the film won several honors, including one for humanitarian storytelling. During the ceremony, Sandra spoke first, thanking the team and the crew. Then she looked toward Keanu and said, "Some people act kindness on screen. Some live it quietly every day. Today, I want to thank the man who showed us that silence can speak love louder than applause." The hall stood in ovation. Keanu lowered his head slightly, shy and humble as always. When he finally walked to the microphone, his words were simple but unforgettable. "I don't deserve this," he said softly, "but I'll accept it for everyone who believes that gentle hands can rebuild what pain destroys. Be kind, even when no one's watching, especially then." The audience rose to their feet. Some clapped, some cried, and others simply stood still, moved by his quiet strength. After the ceremony, as they stepped outside, Sandra looked up at the sky filled with city lights and whispered, "You were right, Keanu. Kindness really is stronger than medicine." He smiled. "It heals everything it touches." They walked away, side by side, knowing their story had become something larger than fame, a living reminder that in a world chasing speed and spotlight, kindness still walked quietly and changed hearts one person at a time. That night, before leaving the city, Keanu visited a children's hospital funded by the Light Project. He didn't announce it, didn't bring cameras. He simply fixed a broken night lamp in the hallway and left a note beside it. It read, "This light is for you. Pass it on when you can." The next morning, a nurse found the lamp glowing softly and smiled through tears.